Hey, thanks for coming to watch the show. Today we're going to be talking about the book It. And this book has been made into a couple of different movies. It's pretty old at this point. It's almost 30 years old, but as you can see, the re-release of the movie just came out a few months ago, so it's still a pretty popular story. So that kind of led me to think about just reading the book and seeing what all the hype was about. And, I've kind of strayed away from Stephen King novels in the past just because I'm not a really big horror fan, and that's obviously what he's very well known for. There was a book that I read a long time ago, or actually a movie that was made out of the book that I read, that I watched, that is called Stand By Me. And this was made from a book that he had written. It was basically like a short story collection, and one of those stories was called The Body, and that was what Stand By Me was made out of. And in a lot of ways, it reminded me quite a bit about Stand By Me, just the way that the characters were set up, and a lot of similarities between the town and some of the things that the kids experienced during the book. Similarly to Stand By Me, it focuses on 7 kids that live in this town, Derry, Maine, and I guess this is actually a real town, and this is a town that Stephen King focuses on quite a bit in a lot of his novels, so I guess he likes to just kind of focus on things that he knows, because he does live in Maine, so he's just doing somewhat of a familiar setting for that. But anyway, the book focuses on these 7 kids in the story. They're Bill, Ben, Mike, Eddie, Stan, Beverly, and Richie. And these 7 kids are growing up in Maine, Derry, Maine. They're like 11 or 12, and they're just kind of going through the summer right after school, and each one of them is experiencing some kind of weird things that are happening in this town. Each one of them has a very unique experience that they've gone through, and it's just kind of like scarred them a little bit, and they're afraid to talk about it. They don't tell their parents, they don't tell any of their friends, but they all kind of come together and share their experience, and then they work together to try and bring down whatever it is that's influencing this town and causing all of these problems and killing people and just making all these weird things happen in Derry. Now, as I said, I don't really like Stephen King novels that much. Before I started reading It, I just kind of strayed away from those because I'm not a big horror fan. But It, despite the movie press that you may have seen or just things you've heard, it really isn't that scary, I found it anyway. It wasn't really just kind of like terrifying about this killer clown on the loose just murdering children or whatever. And there is things like that in the book, but most of the book I found actually focuses more on the relationships that these kids have with one another and just the various things that they go through. And it really just kind of felt more like a story about friendship and just overcoming things as a group, and learning to know your limits and overcome your fears at the same time. So it was really more about that than just about some kind of horror and something happening in this town that they have to kind of fight against. There are horrible things that are happening in this town, but there can be hours where you don't even really hear anything about the clown or it, just the things that it's doing in the town. It's more about the things that it influences people in the town to do, because without spoiling anything, you kind of learn as the book progresses that it is basically just like it has a hold over the town, and it can influence people to do things that they wouldn't normally do, or just act really irrationally and just end up hurting people around them, and then later on they don't even remember it, or they feel like it wasn't them. So it's more stuff like that that's happening in the town that where a lot of the horror will come from in this book. With that being said, the other parts of the book that I really enjoyed is the character development. Obviously, it focuses a lot on the kids, and each one of those children is really well fleshed out, and it tells a lot of things from their perspective, and it really just kind of makes you feel what they're feeling. And that's the sign of a good author, I think. It's just somebody that can put you in someone else's shoes and make you feel like you're really experiencing it. But not just the kids were a really great joy to experience in this book. There was also a lot of small characters that only show up for a little bit, a few minutes at a time, such as a cab driver that picks one of the main characters up, and you just kind of learn about his little backstory and things that he's done in the town, and you really feel like you know this guy, or you rode in his cab, and it really kind of makes you feel connected to him, even though he's just like a small character that doesn't show up again in the book. And there's also another character, a policeman named Mr. Nell, that the kids come into contact with a few times. And again, he doesn't show up very much in the book, but he has a very powerful presence, and he has a really distinct way of talking, and just a lot of things that make you kind of latch onto him, even though he's not a very big part of the book. And you learn a lot about each one of the main characters, the kids in this book, and it just kind of, each one of them has a unique personality trait or something that they have to deal with, such as one of the main characters, Bill. He has a stutter, so every time you're reading him, you have to read it through his stutter, and you kind of experience what it's like to be trying to get something out, and it's on the tip of your tongue, but you just can't say it. And I don't have a stutter, so I can't really ever fully experience what that's like. But this book did a really good job of kind of conveying what it's like to have some kind of disability like that. The other kids, some of them have bad home lives, and they have to deal with abusive parents, or later on in the book, one of them has an abusive spouse. And it's just things like that that kind of make you, experience a lot of different things in life that you may not normally have to go through. But the book does a really good job of conveying what it's like to be in those circumstances. Now, you might not know this, but it actually has 2 parts in it, and I believe they're going to make the second part in a later movie. They've done the first part with the kids, but it actually has 2 main parts, and one of them is the kids as children, and then they come back to Derry 27 years later as adults, and they have to face it again. So that was really neat to kind of to experience. They unfold at the same time, so you don't really know exactly what's going to happen for either story. But I mean, obviously the kids survive the first encounter with it because they grow up to be adults. But that was another part that I really enjoyed, because you kind of know what's going to happen since they're kids, and then they grow up, they're going to survive, but you don't really know exactly what's going to happen as adults when they have to go through the same motions and face it again. So that was really neat to go through, and kind of, it was almost like feeling nostalgic along with your characters and experiencing a lot of, memories and things like that they hadn't seen in 27 years. One thing that I really enjoyed that happens throughout the book is one of the characters, Mike, is writing down a lot of experiences that he went through as a child, or things that he's, talked to other members of the town, and he does this as an adult, and he writes them in a journal, and you get to kind of read along with him and go through these encounters that he has with people that have lived in the town for a long time, and they've seen weird things happening, or they've heard about stuff that's just not quite right. And it's really neat to kind of hear this, because it's almost like hearing about your hometown, like these old timers. You go sit on their front porch or something, and you listen to these stories that they have, and it was just really kind of captivating the way that these stories unfolded, and a lot of the ways that the old timers would explain things that had happened, or they'd seen it in some form. And it was just really neat to kind of go through that with them, and I really enjoyed that part of the book, especially with Mike's journal entries. That was really cool. So despite my initial reluctance to go through a Stephen King novel that's a horror book, and I don't really like that genre for the most part, I found it to be very, very enjoyable. And like I mentioned at the very beginning, that movie Stand By Me, based on the book by Stephen King, The Body, or the short story The Body, if you've listened to that, or you've read it or watched the movie and you liked that, and you liked the way that the kids were portrayed in that, then I would say you'd really enjoy watching it or reading the book. I've never seen the movie, but I could definitely recommend the book just based on the correlations between those 2 things, and just a lot of similarities between that. So if you enjoyed that, I think you would also really like it. And even if you hadn't seen that, I think you would like it. It's a really good book, and it's got a lot of really interesting things that happen in it, and it's not just a horror novel. So if you see, Stephen King, and you're like, oh, I don't like horror stuff, I get scared easy, I think that you could probably handle this, even if you're not like a horror veteran or something, because I don't really like horror stuff. I don't watch the movies or read a whole lot of the books or anything, so it didn't really bother me. So if you're worried about that, then you should be fine. So that's going to do it for my basically like a spoiler-free section. There are quite a bit of spoilers for this book, and there's a couple that I wanted to talk about. So if you're worried about spoilers, or you don't want to hear them or anything, then this is your spoiler warning. So just be warned. If you don't want to see them, just click off the video now. But anyways, one major spoiler that I kind of had a problem with in this book is when they go back to face it as adults, they, they're obviously kind of outnumbered as opposed to how they were before, and Eddie ends up dying. And they just leave him down there in the sewers, which I thought was kind of crappy to do to this lifelong friend, or at least somebody that you've had a lot of really deep experiences with, and just leave him down in the sewers to rot, basically, was just kind of a bad send-off to him. Because, not only is that disrespectful to your friend, but Eddie has a wife, somewhere that he just left. He didn't tell her anything about where he was going or what he was doing or anything, and she's just gonna be like, where's my husband? He's gone now. So I thought that was kind of weird. I wish that they had brought Eddie out, or if maybe he hadn't died. I guess they had to have somebody die, kind of up the stakes a little bit, but I still think they should have found a way to bring Eddie back out. That would have been really nice to see. Something else that was in the book, like towards the very end, that I found a little bit weird was the kids' kind of experience in the tunnels after they face it. And I'm not going to go into a whole lot of details because if you've read the book, you probably know what I'm talking about. But that just felt like really, really weird and like out of place. And when I came to that part in the book, I'd heard rumors that it was in there. I was like, there's no way that he's going to put that in there, right? Like, that's not going to be in the book. And then it's in the book, and I'm just like, probably shouldn't read this. I think I'll skip this part. And it just felt like really odd and out of place. And I feel like the book would have been just fine without it. Would have probably been better without it. Because, despite all the really good things in the book and the good storytelling and everything, that was probably the biggest standout for me, honestly. So, honestly, if you come to that part in the book, since you know it's coming, or if you've heard about it, I would honestly just skip that part because you're not missing anything. And I did a little bit of research on it, like why is this even in the book? And I came upon a Stephen King interview, and he basically just said that he used that as a way to bring the kids back together and kind of overcome their sense of falling apart as a group or whatever. And I feel like there could have been a lot of better ways to do that, especially just without them doing that. It would have been probably better. But he said that Stephen King said he justified that as things have changed a lot since 1985, and this sort of thing is just a lot different now. So you wouldn't really see that, pretty much. I didn't quote him word for word, but I would definitely say that that's something that there's you wouldn't see that now, probably. Probably shouldn't have seen it then either. But aside from that scene, I didn't really have any big problems with the book. I would still definitely recommend it despite that weird scene. Maybe you can find an edited version of it that just takes that out, or just skim over it when you get to it, because you're not missing anything, trust me. But like I said, I would definitely recommend this book. I think it's a very good read, and there's a lot of good things in it to enjoy. So, if you don't have time to read it, I tend to listen to audiobooks, and I definitely recommend this audiobook. The narrator, Steven Weber, does a fantastic job with all the characters, especially it. He does a really good job with making the monster kind of come out with that character. So I definitely recommend that if you don't have time to read, or even if you do, it's still a really good experience. But anyways, thanks for watching this video, and I hope that you have a great time with this new year, 2018, and you have a lot of good experiences and everything. And thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to like it, and also follow me on Twitter @TheBandBroadcast for channel updates and that sort of thing. Anyways, thanks guys. See ya.